That's one of the biggest contrasts I've seen from being a tourist is that you're going to have to integrate, you're going to have to socialize, you're going to have to learn a bit of the language to communicate with people.
I think this is probably the number one, or at least like top 3 challenge, right? Is like really getting the mindset as a new nomad that, oh yeah, like you're in this really cool place, but you still have to work.
I was feeling at the time that if I spend more time in front of the desk, I will get it. And then I felt kind of bad that I going out to be my friend. And I just met my friend in 10 minutes. I solved my whole problem I had for a couple of days.
I think my recommendation to people just generally is to
Let me tell you a fun fact about our podcast. We're at the beginning process and you can have a tremendous influence over our channel. By just liking and subscribing to our channel, you'll help us increase the quality of the videos that we're creating. Also, you'll stay in the loop with the new videos which are coming every week. Thank you and enjoy the episode. So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to have Jenny with us today at Infinito Untold Tales podcast. She is a former corporate tech recruiter and she has been digital nomad for a while now. She's been traveling to 20 plus countries across Europe, South America, and Asia. And I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. Welcome.
thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's go back to the beginning. Tell me just a bit how you started your journey as a digital nomad.
Yeah, well, maybe I should start a little bit first and foremost, just to tell people like what I do currently. Yeah, so I'm a productivity coach for consultants who are digital nomads, and I help them to optimize their health and wellness, so that way they can really improve their focus and energy, so they can do more work in less time. So yeah, just so people know like what I focus on currently and everything. And yeah, essentially, like how I got into the digital nomad world is, I had been working in corporate jobs for over 20 years. I had been, doing the 9 to 5 thing in, big cities like San Francisco and New York for, many, many years, and just feeling like I was doing the right things for the American dream to like, get a salary, collect my paycheck, and live the dream life. And up until last year, it was going well for me until I was laid off from my last job, and it was really a wake up call for me. It really kind of woke up a lot of questions for myself in terms of, what are my goals? What do I really enjoy in life? And when I was in corporate, I was always that person who would max out their vacation time. I had worked in tech for a few years, and tech companies are notorious for giving you unlimited PTO, unlimited paid days off, which is unusual overall in the US if you're not from the US. And so I would constantly be going on 2-week international vacations as much as I possibly could, but I always felt like it was never enough. I always felt like this desire to just get to know the country more and get to know the people there more. And I just could never do that in a corporate job. It just really held me back. So yeah, when I got laid off, it really made me rethink my philosophy around work as a whole, but also it just really opened up literally a whole new world of opportunities for me. And so I really chose rather to not, focus on the negative part, because a lot of people often do with losing their jobs. I really focused on the silver lining of now I can really work wherever I want to from around the world. And that just was such a game changer mindset wise for me in this last year, as I now have built up my digital nomad coaching business, because I really want people to, enjoy that freedom lifestyle they've worked so hard to achieve, because I understand the challenges of what it takes to get there.
Absolutely. Sounds like a very interesting story. And something that I want to kind of tie up to is that you needed that point on which you got laid off. And I presume that when that happened, you're kind of like
thinking, why is this happening to me? This is so bad, like, and trying to make sense of everything. But sometimes you need that discomfort, needs that kind of terrible things to happen to you in order to be able to find a different direction, to kind of push into a different direction. And I
Yeah.
think, now probably looking back, you're thinking that that was one of the best things that ever happened to your life.
In certain ways, yes, which a lot of people think I'm nuts when I say that. I mean, do I miss having a steady paycheck? Sure, of course. Who wouldn't? But I do think that corporate jobs hold us back in so many ways. And just once that was lifted from me, I just was able to view the world and view opportunities in a whole different way. And it's just opened up so many like interesting opportunities for me in this last year. I've met so many cool people like yourself that, I probably would have never met otherwise. And, I really am so thankful for that in so many ways. So yeah, I really try to focus on the positive aspects of what situation I went through. Because you really, yeah, you can't focus on the negatives. So they'll just bring you down. So
Absolutely. There's always like a positive thing from anything that happens. And, we can talk about COVID for a second. It's like when the lockdown happens, everybody is so desperate because, you can't have to work from home and so on and so forth. But that also pushed the development of technology that's also from the mindset of the people can work from home because they were forced at the beginning. And that kind of opened a new class of opportunities that weren't available before from a technology standpoint and also from a mentality of company standpoints. And I think that, overall looking back, that's also, in retrospective, a good thing that happened overall, even though it was pretty terrible at the time. But like as a whole, you look back like, oh, that's pretty good. Like my life is better after that happened as opposed to before.
yeah, I do think that COVID was a game changer when it came to really making the nomad world just more accessible and normalized. I just think it was more, I don't know, considered more as like a fringe thing to do before the pandemic. And the pandemic just made it just yeah much more accessible, attainable, realistic for a lot of people. I do think at least like since I come from the US, there are a lot of companies currently who are, changing their work mindsets from, before they were really very open to, letting people work internationally from anywhere. And now they're really forcing people back into the office with, return office mandates and such. And I really like, I'm very against that. I'm just such a huge remote advocate. And it was a big reason why I wanted to leave corporate as a whole because I do think that that is such backwards thinking when we have the technology to be able to allow for people to work from anywhere and people want to work from anywhere. People like working remotely. And so I want to help to champion that lifestyle as much as possible and be the antithesis to the corporate overlord that's dictating what people can and can't do. Because I think it's just so wrong and yeah, dinosaur thinking in many respects. So
Absolutely, and it's really good that you have that great experience within your career, that you know exactly what's happening and you know very well the corporate world, so you can see the contrast between the life you live now and the life you had before. So one thing I want to tie up to, because you mentioned that when you're working, you're traveling a lot. And now, since you're not working for the corporate environment anymore, you have more freedom to be able to work, to travel everywhere you want to. So tell me just a bit about the traveling experience, the social life, and also the cultural exchange that you had in your experience. How did that shift your perception of the life? Or how did that change your view in general and also your belief system?
yeah. Well, I think there's like a different mindset as a whole between going on vacation for a very short period versus being a nomad and really wanting to excuse me, invest longer term into the lifestyle as a whole, but also in the countries you're living in and the people that you're meeting and, the local culture and customs and languages, right? There's just like so many extra facets, because I think when we're vacationing, we're kind of speeding through that life, right? We're like, at least for me, like when I was on vacation, especially if I went somewhere far away like Thailand, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do 50 things today to try to maximize the short time I'm here so I can, check all the boxes of all the things I want to see and do. But, as a nomad, I'm such a believer of slowmadding. And if people aren't familiar with the term, it's more about like taking a longer period of time just in one place and really focusing on making that your home. Maybe even if it's for a month or two, right? It doesn't have to be a crazy long period, but at least you're really getting to know like the daily life, the people, the culture. And so I think for me, like transitioning into the nomad space, it's just been very eye-opening how people approach the differences between vacationing and nomading, because it really is a huge mindset shift.
Absolutely. And you have things like, I don't know, like small things they do on an everyday basis, like, go to the barber or go in grocery shoppings or stuff like that, that you wouldn't normally do in a new place. And then just like, okay, now I have to talk to people. And something interesting, you mentioned about the language barrier, because most of the local businesses, they don't speak English. I live in Portugal now, and the local butcher doesn't speak English. The local barber doesn't speak English. So you kind of have to interact. You're forced into interaction culturally because you're not tourist anymore. You kind of need those small services. So that is truly remarkable. And that's one of the biggest contrasts I've seen from being a tourist, is that you gonna have to integrate, you're gonna have to socialize, you're gonna have to learn a bit of the language to communicate with people.
Yeah, I think like, and it doesn't have to be something that's like so crazy where like, you mentioned, for example, you're in Portugal. It's not like people have to spend like, weeks and months, learning Portugal. Of course, that's great if you really like want to get into that and you see yourself living in Portugal longer term. But I think like just like little things can make such a big difference when you're interacting with locals, smiling and just showing that you're like a friendly person. You appreciate like their generosity, or then, helping you, at the butcher to pick out the right meats or whatever the case may be, right? I think there's like these non-verbal things you can do to show them I appreciate you, kind of a situation. But I also think it's an extra to like learn at least like a few, of the local words and phrases, so that way you can do some basic communication. Of course, it's because I've heard like Portuguese especially is very difficult to learn. So, if you just like take a little bit of time to do those little things, I think people will recognize that it'll go a long way. And so I think that's also part of the difference of being a nomad, where you kind of get away with not doing that. Like, if you're a tourist on vacation, just spending time in tourist areas where they do speak English, versus if you're a nomad, spending time in more local areas. Yeah, it helps to like, actually engage with the locals in their local language.
Yeah, very interesting what you mentioned, that about smiling and about trying to engage, is that I think it's a big thing about communication, is that you have to be open to new culture. You have to showcase some degree of interest in communicating. And as far as my experience goes, nomading, everywhere I went to, people didn't even try to meet me halfway, normally I say. People go all the way through to kind of try to explain me things. They would go into the shelves like, look, do you want this? No. Okay. How about this? No. And then they make a lot of effort to try to communicate with me. And that was truly remarkable, because if I showcase some degree of positive energy and there's some willingness to interact, they'll go the extra mile to try to communicate with me. That's something truly remarkable about traveling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I think like most locals really do appreciate that nomads are there frequenting their business. I mean, that's how their businesses typically thrive in many capacities. So I think a lot of business owners, they want to make sure you feel welcome. So you come back to their business, or you tell others about their business, kind of a situation. So I think that's generally the case from what I found too.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else I wanted to talk to you about is that, again, I want to kind of focus about the transition that you had before, because you're traveling as vacation part and now you're traveling and working. So as mentioned as well, it's a big difference between two mindsets. And what did you find to be the biggest challenge when you arrived to a new place, knowing that you are a digital nomad now? You're not a tourist anymore. You're not on paid vacation. You have to also work there.
Yeah, I think this is probably the number one, or at least like top three challenge, right? Is like really getting the mindset as a new nomad that, oh yeah, like you're in this really cool place, but you still have to work and either, depending on your situation, get your 9 to 5 job done, whatever hours as might translate to, or, if you're a consultant as a coach, get your client work done situation. And that can be, a really hard pill to swallow in many capacities when you really want to be going out to the beach or going hiking. There's always distractions and FOMO that people deal with. I think for me, like, having a plan ahead of time, and this is kind of what I get into, like, in terms of like my productivity coaching and how I help my clients as well. But like, I think a little bit of planning even can make a huge difference because, a lot of people just kind of like jump into it. They're like, okay, I'm going to go to Bali for 3 months and I'll just figure out how to work when I get there. I know I'll have to work late hours. I'll just, figure it out, stay up late, no big deal. And I think that's where people get burned out more oftentimes than not because they realize that it's way harder in theory to do that for, a few months. Then they realize, and so that's where, like, I always encourage people to have a couple of schedules worked out. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but I think it boils down to, do you think you need to be working more morning hours or evening hours based on, where your clients or your work is based, right? And then how do you kind of schedule everything else you want to do around that? But on top of that, I want to make sure, especially when I'm working with my clients, that they're really optimizing for their health and wellness. So, for example, the Bali example I was giving, if you're working to 3 a.m., 4 a.m., obviously your sleep is getting massively disrupted. And there might be situations for that, right? So I would work with a client to be like, okay, what are your must-haves that you have to be online to meet certain client expectations? And how can we make sure that you're at least getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep or whatever their optimal sleep is? And we're working around that, right? And really prioritizing it as well, because I've often found that like the people who are staying up late in Bali, then they're just, they're awake, right? Then they want to like play video games or they're doing social media because they need to unwind. And even though it's 4 a.m, they're wired, right? Because they've been up working. And so I think it's also like optimizing things like sleep routines and things like that to make sure that they're really able to support their work lifestyle with their new environment. So yeah, a lot of it is way easier said than done when people get in country.
Yeah, it's interesting that I mentioned that because my experience is not always the case that people treat it very touristically. It's most likely the case that people work way too much than they're supposed to be. And then you think, oh, I'll become a digital nomad and I'll just work 3-4 hours a day and then, I'll sit on the beach for the rest of the day. But then you have to think about that. You also can have a business. And when you have your own business, it's like, it's dragging you all the time to work and you can't do. It's like when you have a job, you have responsibility for 8 hours. And then if something happens, like you have other people in the team, it's not always everything on you. But when you have your own business, you feel like nothing is moving unless you're there. So like, I feel like even if it happened to me as well, even if I was on the beach where I just going surfing or just hanging out with my friends, I felt guilty about it because I felt like, I'm not progressing with my business. So I think the balance has to be both ways, but also something that I want to talk to you about is that when you think about the digital nomad, you think about freedom. So freedom, it's opposite to schedule for in many people's minds. So when you think about freedom, it's like, I wouldn't have a schedule, but it's like, you need to have a schedule in order to be able to have freedom. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I love that question because I do think that, yeah, like schedule automatically makes people feel like they're boxed in. And I understand why, but I like to think that there's freedom in that schedule because, like, as a nomad, you're especially if you're a consultant or a coach and you're really defining and building your own business, you really have the freedom and flexibility to make that schedule whatever you want it to be. Within some considerations like, do you need to be online at certain times for client calls, kind of a situation. But I think when you're scheduled and okay, between 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., I'm going to be heads down and focused on deep work projects. So something that's more longer term, more impactful. Then you can really pencil that in and then be like, hey, I'm in Bali. I want to spend the afternoon at the beach. Well, you just got in some major productivity time in the morning. So yeah, you should go on and reward yourself, And so that's one of the things that I work with my clients on is you can actually build your schedule as puzzle pieces. You could do that 3 hours of work in the morning, go to the beach in the afternoon, maybe do a couple hours of more work before dinner, and then relax with, a glass of wine, have a nice dinner with some friends, right? I think there's a way to really make things work, but being very intentional about how you spend your day will actually help you to enjoy your time more and get all the stuff you want done. So I think there is freedom in being more scheduled. Yeah, it sounds very counterintuitive, but it actually does work.
I totally agree with that in that regard, in the sense that I found myself sometimes being busy for the sake of feeling like I'm busy and just running around circle to kind of feel productive. And then sometimes a friend of mine giving me this idea, like, hey, listen, in order to be able to tackle that, just try one trick for 1 week. And I'm the kind of person who likes to experiment, so I will try anything for 1 week just to see how it goes. So he said, look, a 4-hour block for the day that you're going to work and nothing else. You don't touch your computer for the rest of the day. And I was like, okay, that means that when I'm working, I actually have to work on everything that's relevant, knowing the fact that I only have 4 hours. But something else that kind of struck me is that the first question that came to my mind was like, what am I going to do for the rest of the day? And the question itself I found very, very appalling because, it's like I'm in Portugal, I have a lot of things to do. And then I have a schedule that allows me freedom and I can't think of anything to do, at least in the first land.
More of that.
Yeah, I mean, I
Beauty. That's the beauty because I think like many of us who have worked corporate jobs, we think that in order to be productive, you have to work 8 hours or more, right? I mean, I definitely bought into that for so many years coming from corporate life. But if you're getting 4 hours of really impactful work time, awesome. Like, to me, that's a huge win, Of course, it all depends on what is going on with your business and what, the priorities are at the moment. But, like, I think you absolutely should take that time and, like, reward yourself and celebrate. And I really encourage my clients to spend time at the beach or go hiking or go socialize because I think it'll actually make you better at your work because you'll be happier, So that's my whole mantra around like you can do more work in less time when you have that dedicated time block. So it just it works wonders in many ways.
Yeah, for sure. And also it's also very important to be able to focus on the priorities. And there's always like a million things that would be nice to have. They're not priorities. So you have them all on the to-do list there and kind of like drag around. And I think it's kind of a dimension of being okay with yourself. It's like, hey, I'm not a workaholic. I'm not supposed to be working all the time. And I think that we need to kind of, at least for digital nomads, especially for us, or I say us, people who've been living a long time in the big city, because there's this hustle culture, just work all the time and progress. And you see other people kind of slipping into the office and probably have the experience as well personally. And then you kind of feel like in order to be able to get further away, you need to work harder and more hours. But then you kind of have to disconnect that. And one of the things that's kind of struck me when I moved to Portugal is that there is no hustle culture here. Just people are relaxed. way too relaxed. And then I kind of have to embrace that part to kind of de-install the London vibe into my mind to kind of adjust to Portugal. And something truly interesting that happened and remarkable is that I became more productive, like my business generated more money while I started being more relaxed in that way and just focusing on those 4 hours and just focusing on the most important thing and then taking the time to relax.
Yeah. Terrible. I mean, kind of piggybacking a little bit on what you were saying is like redefining what productivity means, because I think a lot of people think about it as being in front of their laptop, right? Like, and actually like typing away. But I think of work in like a multifaceted way. Like, for example, like, say you're a member of a co-working space. I always encourage my clients to join co-working spaces that have a lot of events for their members. So that way, like, you're socializing where you're at. It's kind of like a 2-in-1 benefit in many capacities. But, in that sense, you're meeting potential friends, potential dating partners, but also like potential clients as well, because you never know, especially if you're heads down typing away all day, who you might be sitting next to or across from who could be somebody who could influence your business. And if you're not striking up conversation with them, you might not ever know, right? So I do think that there's almost a redefinition of productivity and work that needs to be had, like especially amongst the nomad community, because I view that as like working in a certain sense, right? Because you're, having conversations with different kinds of people and seeing where those conversations can go. And I think those are ways that could maybe inadvertently impact your business in a great way. So I think it's important to be open-minded about those kinds of opportunities as well and get away from your desk at certain times too.
Absolutely. And also, I think that is connected to the fact that most digital nomads work kind of solo or they just work on themselves in the home. So it happened to me quite recently too, to smash my head to the wall to kind of find a solution for a problem. I was just thinking for like a couple of days, couldn't get anywhere. I just went out, I met a friend and just casual by conversation. I was telling him like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I try X, Y, and Z, nothing works. And then it comes along like, hey, have you tried ABC? It's like, oh, no, I didn't think about it. It was so simple and so stupid. It was like, how can I not think of that? But it just, I was so locked into my point of view that I kind of forgot about something to look somewhere else. And then I just talked to a friend in 10 minutes. He gave me a brilliant idea that was just out there to take it. And, tying up to your to conversation, you feel like I was feeling at the time that if I spend more time in front of the desk, I will get it. And then I felt kind of bad like going out to be my friend. And I just met my friend in 10 minutes. I solved my whole problem I had for a couple of days. I was like, wow, that's really remarkable. You don't necessarily have to kind of smash your head to the laptop to solve everything that you need to do.
That is such a fantastic point. I can't emphasize that enough to the audience that's listening here because, I mean, as nomads, I mean, especially if you're more of like a solo nomad, if you are a consultant or a coach, this is probably less relevant for somebody who has a corporate job because they do have built-in coworkers. But for those of us who are soloists, we have our own businesses. Man, oh man, I definitely have been there right with you where, I've been racking my brain on certain things and ChatGPT can only take you so far at certain times. Sometimes it really cannot replace a human when it comes to brainstorming. And yeah, it's crazy when you talk with a friend or you talk with, somebody else in an adjacent business, how like they can really help you to see a new light on the challenge you were trying to solve. And my gosh, I mean, think about the time savings there, right? Just by you having like that a 10-minute conversation. So I think it's just such an important thing to say that it is so important to be social and it can really help you in your business in different capacities. So.
Yep. And talking about balance, that's definitely helping out, to be more productive because you have the social time as well and you kind of exchange ideas and then, everything comes together like, oh, all of a sudden I know what to do. And I didn't spend another, 15 hours trying to figure out what to do. I just met up with my friends, kind of relax. And then when I went back to it, I already know what to do. So that's interesting how that productivity going to. So another thing that I want to talk to you about, it's about traveling. You mentioned that you prefer Slowmad, which is spending more time in there into a location. But one thing I wanted to ask you, it's about balance when you're traveling a bit more often. I had this experience during the summer, and I was traveling throughout Europe, and I spent like 6 weeks there, 2 weeks there, another 6 weeks somewhere else. And I looked at my balanced lifestyle, and I noticed that the first thing that went out the window was the diet and fitness. And I was thinking, like, why is that the first thing? And then I realized that everything else has immediate consequences. And if I don't sleep enough, in a couple of days, I'm going to be a zombie, not going to be productive anymore. But if I kind of quit or kind of cheat on my diet or don't do my exercises, this is not going to have an immediate impact. I'm not going to feel the right way. So one thing I wanted to ask you is like, how do you keep yourself vigilant to also make sure that you exercise and keep your diet in place? And also sometimes you can avoid sleeping as well. But like, how do you remind yourself that, even if you're fluctuating in space and everything kind of goes out the window because you're in your own location, to keep yourself focused and disciplined to remember that those things must be done, even though you're not going to have an immediate impact if you don't do them.
Yeah, and that's such an important topic. I mean, I think for like diet, sleep, and exercise, I kind of think of them as the great trifecta personally, right? I mean, they're just the mainstay for any person, right? No matter what you're doing. I mean, I'm just stating the obvious here, right? But I think, yes, so much of that obvious um focus does tend to go out the window when you become a nomad. I've heard this from so many people. I've experienced it myself, and that's part of why I'm such an advocate for it, because once I fix those things for myself, I noticed such a huge change in, my productivity for my work, how my energy of how I was showing up for my friends. It just translated in so many great other ways. So I'll start for nutrition and the diet side of things, because obviously when you get to new country, who doesn't want to go out and like try some of the local food? I mean, that's part of the fun of it, right? And so I always encourage that. Like, I mean, I don't want to like say to somebody like, no, you can't have the awesome Thai food when you're in Thailand. Like, that's no fun, right? But of course, like, with any kind of like nutrition, diet, it's all about balance and everything. And I do think like one of the best things you can do is to make sure that wherever you stay, that you have a kitchen. So either that's like an Airbnb. Personally, I like to stay in co-livings, and that tends to be more of a shared kitchen sort of a situation, but can also be great because you might be cooking bigger meals with other people situation. But at least where you have a kitchen where you can go to the grocery store and, buy fresher foods. You're not getting as much, when it comes to like preservatives or oils or fats when you're, eating out all the time. You can really control the ingredients and everything. So what I recommend for people is, yeah, make sure that you have a kitchen that you have accessible during your trip. And then also like make sure that there's like, grocery stores or farmers markets within walking distance, ideally. So that way you can, pick up like fresh produce and stuff, even just like the basics, like get some bananas, get some, whatever, is local, kind of a situation is great. And I think just those like little things can help that like because if you're out eating dinner with friends and you want to splurge, then, at least you've had like a healthier, breakfast and a lunch situation, right? And you're gonna have more sustained energy throughout the day. So that's one big tip I always recommend for people. On the exercise side,
If I would like to keep it just a bit more about nutrition because this is a interesting stuff. So from my experience so far from cultural experience is that almost none of the culture food is actually healthy. And that cross culture is if I'm offending anybody, I'm offending everybody. Uh, because I think this is a cross culture. And I've been thinking about this. Why is it that happening? I think the best logical explanation is that we're the first or maybe the second generation that we have abundance of foods. And our ancestors basically they tried to get as many calories as possible with what they had available. They didn't think, is it healthy? Is it not? Like I might not have food for a long period of time. I just need to get as many calories into a meal. So that's how the traditional food was formed. And now you want to go to the new place, as you mentioned, and trying to try the local food, but you have to keep that in mind that it might not be the best thing for you. So you want to try that, but you have to have that just a bit of a balance. So as you mentioned as well, it's good to cook at home. But like if you want to have some traditional, maybe just once a week, or you know, maybe like in intervals as opposed to all the time.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's definitely a lot of the comfort foods, and comfort food inherently is pretty bad for you in most cases situation. Yeah, very, very heavy, fatty, carb-laden kinds of foods. So, but yeah, again, like, I mean, I think it is important to try some of those foods when you're in country. I think like that'd be such a sad thing if you like traveled to a faraway place and didn't try the food just because you were like so nervous about like ruining your diet every once in a while. But that's where it does help to, yeah, plan to, yeah, have salads, have fruits, eggs, low fat cheese, like things like that on hand to, make sure that, yeah, you have like a good, like balanced diet so you can like, treat yourself on those certain things. So I think it's all about balance and moderation personally.
Yeah, you have to keep that in mind. I was strict kind of a bit when I was traveling quite a bit to, I had a kitchen at home, but I was only making sandwiches and going outside. And, that can also be another balance, like opposite scale when you don't eat enough because you're always in a rush to go places. So I think that, as you mentioned as well, you have to have your mind on balance at all time. Think about like, I need to make sure that I'm careful with that element in his own term.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like one little trick that I've done when I've gone to a new country is before I get there, I'll look on Google Maps, like in the area of where I'm staying, and I'll like start Googling like salad or health food, and I'll like save those locations in my phone. So that way, when I get there, I have a short list of places. So, like, if there's a time where I haven't had time to go to the grocery, or I just don't have time or energy to cook, at least like I flag certain places as backups where I'm like, okay, I have no food at home, but there's a salad place that's 10 minutes down the street. I'm going to run over there and grab a salad, right? So I think it's that little bit of extra planning that can really help you to stay on track with your goals too.
Yeah, but it's also like a tricky part because now where I live in Portugal, most of the places, restaurants around me are all you can eat. And if you go in the afternoon and like there's all you can eat, it's like, oh, I paid the money anyway, so I might as well just kind of fill up.
There's definitely that too. And also, I will say, like, a lot of the places in Europe, especially for lunch, they're like hour-long, 2-hour lunches, But it can really vary. Like, for example, when I was in Stockholm, there were a fair amount of like take and go places. So yeah, it really depends on where you're at. But obviously, like, yeah, for those kinds of situations, it might not be as much of an option. So you really kind of have to think about like workarounds.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk a bit about the fitness part of things now.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like I think a lot of times when people think about like getting in exercise as a nomad, that they think, okay, I'll just join a gym once I get there situation. And of course that can work for a lot of people. But I think like what tends to happen is how we were chatting earlier that you might have lofty goals of working a lot less. But in theory, people tend to work a decent amount, And so if you're working, 8, 10, 12 hours, your goals of going to the gym might get completely derailed or a client deadline might get in the way, right? And so you kind of have to plan for the unexpected, in those capacities. And so what I work with my clients on is having like some backup plans in place. So one thing I advise them on is before they even leave for their nomad travels to purchase some packable workout equipment. So that can be things like a packable yoga mat. And they make those that are specifically meant for travel, where they fold up really tightly and don't take up a lot of space. There's also things like resistance bands or a TRX. They're very lightweight. They don't take up a lot of space, but you can do a lot of exercises with them. So just having those tools in your arsenal can really help. And then along with that, to have options for at-home workouts or even workouts you could do outside if it's a nice day. So I work with my clients to find things like YouTube channels that offer free workouts or even like paid channels or apps that they can subscribe to, usually at like a low cost. Like most of them are between like $7 to $15 US a month, I would say. So pretty affordable. So that way they have options where if they're super busy one day, instead of like having to take the time to get to and from the gym and get in an hour workout, maybe they just do a 30-minute workout at home and use like a YouTube workout and do something with their resistance bands, right? So giving them options so that way they can stay on track with their goals.
Sounds like, yeah, like facilitating that and making that easier for yourself. And that's something, very interesting. And we talk about nutrition as well, that you need to facilitate that process in order to be able to make it approachable and easy for you. And I want to talk briefly about creating a system that, you also implement those things, because everybody can, it's pretty easy to exercise if you want to, even if you don't have a place. Like you can just put your shoes on and go for a run, or, just do a bunch of push-ups, or you can, like kind of come up with exercise very easily. But like, how do you advise people and also personally to have a system in place that kind of pushes you to remember that this is important and also keeps you disciplined to be able to undertake those exercises?
Yeah. I think one small thing you can do is going back to our earlier conversation of work blocks and really having an exercise block or even a meal prep block. Like you're really budgeting time specifically in your calendar and treating it just like it was a client meeting. I think that's the best mindset tool to get into, to be like, okay, like I need to do this for myself. There's a reason why I've scheduled this in my calendar. If I really care about, my health and wellness, I will make sure to follow through with this. And this is also where, having a coach can come in handy, because that definitely sounds good in theory, which is much harder to do in practice, right? I'm definitely guilty of that as well. Hey, we're all human, kind of a situation. But a coach can say, hey, did you stick to your workout goals this week? Did that, work block, for exercise work for you? Because I really want to get to the heart. If it's not working for them, we get into why is that, right? Like, do they feel like they don't have enough energy? Is it the wrong time of day? So I actually really help them to focus on the why behind it. And if it's not working, let's try something new, right? Because it doesn't have to be at 8 a.m. every weekday, right? We can change things around. So yeah, it's helpful to test and trial, but also have flexibility around it.
Yeah, it's interesting what to say. I think that people are different and different things work to different people. So in this direction, there is no one size fits all. And then, try, as mentioned as well, some people prefer to work in the morning, some people prefer to work out in the afternoon. And also you have to take into consideration the schedule that you have for work. If you work remotely for a company that is in a different time zone, you kind of have to adjust around that. As you mentioned as well, if you're in Bali and then you finish work at 3 a.m., you can't really have a workout, like 6, 7 a.m. because you're probably going to be sleeping.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, that's where like if you know you're gonna have to shift your entire schedule, then you need to shift your whole like exercise and overall like health mentality along with that. And I think that's where people often miss the mark because they prioritize the work and then they just try to squeeze in everything else and bits and pieces wherever they can. And it just doesn't work for them, right? So I think that's where like having an equal prioritization is important.
Yeah, definitely. And just as a personal advice, what seems to be working for me, and also it's beneficial on multiple levels, is to join not necessarily local gym, but I prefer, I really like martial arts. So I go to a local martial arts gym, and then that's really useful for two elements. One of them, well, you're going to have specific classes and you know that you have to go to that time or you're going to miss out. So it kind of makes you more responsible to go because you don't feel like you can postpone it or you can do it tomorrow. Like it's either now or it's not happening. So that kind of pushed me towards doing it. And second of all, it's a really good way to connect to local people.
Yes.
So martial arts is kind of like a team sport, especially in training purposes and training stages. So one of the things that I've been trying since I moved to Portugal is to connect with local people. And almost everywhere I go, they're also like Nomad, but like a martial arts gym is the only place that they're only local and they can barely speak English, which is really good because this pushes me towards, practicing the language skills. And I train physically and I also train from a language standpoint at the same time, which is really great.
I love that. I think that's honestly like such a great like example of things because I mean you're doing so many things at the same time that are good for you that you don't even realize. You're practicing the language, you're meeting new people, you're getting away from your computer and reducing eye strain. You're getting exercise. You're learning a new sports. Martial arts. Like I mean, there's just so many great things about that. So I love that example. That actually makes me think about like I'm working with a current client who is planning to nomad in Brazil. He's nomaded there once before. He plans to go back there in the spring. And he and I talked about like taking jujitsu classes while he's in country because obviously Brazilian jiu-jitsu, that's the local, martial art. And so I just think that that's such a cool way to like add to your experience in many capacities. So yeah, I love that. And I'll just add also on top of that real quick that I would recommend, even if you're not into something like martial arts, just joining like a sports team, even if it's something like a pickup game, right? Like pickleball is a great one to do while you're traveling, very social too. Basketball, things like that, where, yeah, it's like you're combining these different things from the fresh air, the social, the exercise all in one. It's really maximizing your time and efforts. And I mean, when I've done those kinds of things, I feel so good. Like I'm just radiating energy afterwards. I mean, do you feel that way after your classes?
Absolutely. Well, I can barely walk when I walk out of the gym, but
In a good way, I guess.
yeah, that's a common thing. So, every time, because I have a trainer that kind of pushes me, and then I also like to be pushed. And then I kind of almost every time I kind of reach my limits because, like there's always an extra exercise you can do in 5 minutes and be dead. So it's like at the end of the day, if I'm still walking, it's like, okay, just do 100 kicks on the back each leg. It's like, okay, that's I don't know, for anybody who doesn't do martial arts, it's like you're gonna have the first 10 kicks, you're gonna hit hard, and the second 20, you're gonna kind of tap, and then by 50 upwards, you're gonna barely touch the bag. You can almost lift your leg anymore.
Yeah.
So there's always like an end up exercise that he can make me do to kind of just be dead. But personally, I always been an athletic person, or I've always been a sportive, but I never enjoyed gym or like traditional exercises for the sake of exercise. So I always enjoy like playing tennis for cardio or paddle a lot because I think that when you run with purpose, when you run after something, like just to chase the ball to get, from here to there, your mind doesn't think about, okay, I'm tired, whatever, just needs to one more step to get the ball and then I'll stop. And then you have another ball you have to chase, and then you have to go to the other part to chase the ball. And then you forget about the fact you're tired because you're such in competitive mindset at the time. And then by the end of the game, it's like, oh man, I'm really tired. I run for a bit, and you don't realize that.
Yeah, and I think for anybody who's listening who might not be like a sports kind of a person, there's still like opportunities in great ways. Like, for example, if you join like a meetup where you're going hiking, right? Especially if you're in a place that has like great mountains and great scenery. I mean, what a great way to combine sightseeing and taking in like the local, like views than like going on like a sunrise or a sunset hike. And then, yeah, you're also socializing and getting in that exercise too. So you don't necessarily have to be a sports person to, do these kinds of things. But I think just with like a little bit of planning, I think you can, accomplish these different things.
Absolutely. And I really love the example of hiking that you mentioned, because I like that. And I think I advise to everybody who wants to meet people, is like, it's the best thing ever to meet people, like even better than meetups, even better than anything else. It's just because first thing first, you have the environment, which is a great topic of conversation. Second of all, you're doing something and it's like a playful thing that you're doing. And then you have to kind of walk around with some people and engage in conversation. And it kind of open up a lot of opportunities to be able to talk. And I met most of my close friends doing hikes nowadays. And that's really interesting. We also have like locally a meetup for socializing purposes, but like I feel like when you go to a meetup, you're there to talk and then you have to talk. But when you go hiking, the main activity is hiking. So I think that's kind of talking to the side thing that you do, and it gives you a bit more freedom into the conversation and also into the dynamic that you have with people.
Absolutely. And I'll add that I think what's kind of nice, especially as a nomad, is when you're hiking and you're really like stopping to enjoy like the local scenery and nature. I think it really makes you appreciate like the country that you're in. Because I think as nomads, we get a lot of flack for, not contributing to the local community or environment. And I think that's a great way to really better immerse yourself and appreciate like what you're really there to experience. And then I think you'll just be more mindful of being like, yeah, I really want to like go to the local farmers markets and see what's locally grown here and support local businesses. I don't know. I think it's just a nice domino effect. I don't know if that's just me or not.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of showcase you like a first person the location and also the beauty of the place you are into, and something that sometimes can miss out. And I can give you an example from Portugal. Like we don't really have trails here, like hiking trails that they're challenging. It's just more like pathways as opposed to trails. They're kind of flat and just, you can hike for like 30, 40 meters, but then it's just going to be flat out. But there's some amazing views, because Algarve is very renowned for having those huge rocks. And then you have like rocks are like 50, 60 meters tall, and then they're above the ocean. So they're just tremendously beautiful. And also you have like some views from there. It's just fantastic. They're unique in the world. So that kind of gives you a perspective like, hey man, I really live in a fantastic place. And it kind of gives you back that kind of gratitudes, and also like, I have a pretty good life,
Yeah, that gratitude, that mindfulness, because we are very lucky to live this lifestyle in many respects. So I think just like taking that time to really appreciate your surroundings is important. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. And I think that gratitude is a very important thing, and it shouldn't always be natural. It can also be voluntary, and I think that you have to remind yourself. Like one thing that I do personally is that there's a trap when you live long enough in a place to kind of get used to the surrounding and don't appreciate them anymore. So what I do every day, I kind of take some time to appreciate and just list all the things that I am grateful for the place that I have, for the friends that I have, for the business that I have, for the fact that I'm healthy, for the fact that I get a great deal of opportunities to travel around, and just remind myself over and over again that I live a great life. And that's not always come naturally, but like if I put myself there and I start listing the thing that I'm grateful for, eventually they'll come to me, and I was like, oh my God, I really live a great life.
Nice. I love that. I think that's a great mantra to live by. So love it.
Absolutely. It's really great on the sunset, because you have this kind of spectacle of lights. And then that kind of helps tremendously to like, okay, to really, really appreciate that.
That sounds pretty awesome right now, I have to say. So yes, definitely soak up those sunsets while you can there. So.
Absolutely. And this is a mindset that I advise to everybody because, you know, you don't want to get trapped into getting too used to the place that you live into and then you don't appreciate it anymore. And you get in that depressive state on which, you know, just kind of like everything becomes normal and status quo. You want to remind yourself that you're blessed to live a great life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Now in closing, I have two questions that I usually like to ask to everybody. So my favorite question I'm going to ask you is like, what advice to give to your younger self before you start traveling, before you start your journey? So I'm going to take you back to the place where you're still working for the corporate world, and then you know you're about to get laid off, and then what would you say to your younger self?
Yeah. I mean, so like I'm very open and honest about my age. I'm in my 40s. And so I really wish that I had started nomading just so much earlier. I mean, of course, like coulda, shoulda, woulda, you know, hindsight is 2020 sort of a situation. And I really wish that I had said no to the corporate life earlier because I do think that corporate life makes it incredibly difficult to live the nomad life. I mean, I think there are still some companies that are good with supporting remote work, but they're unfortunately becoming fewer and fewer rather than growing in size and scale. And so I just think that those opportunities are just very hard to come by. And so I think my recommendation to people just generally is to think outside of that 9 to 5 box. You know, I had never in a million years considered myself to be somebody who wanted to be an independent worker, to build my own business. If you had told me that a year ago, I would have thought you were crazy. I mean, honestly and truly, because I drank the corporate Kool-Aid, as they say. Like, I was really bought into the salary benefit life as being the main way to go for stability. But I think layoffs have become such the norm, unfortunately, these days, especially in the US, that I think it's just so important to spend time to build something for yourself, whether that be something on the side as, you know, something small right now or something that you could really build under something bigger and more sustainable longer term. That is one of the biggest regrets I have is being 100% reliant on a corporate salary and never, you know, having built a side hustle, never relying on a secondary source of income. And it left me in a lurch when I got laid off. And I really want people to have something as a backup plan, not just from a financial standpoint, but also something that they really enjoy, that they could build into something bigger. And I do think that pretty much everybody has that in them. They just don't realize it. Well, because I didn't realize it. So I hope that helps in certain respects.
Let me challenge that point for a second. I'm not gonna be long, but like it's something very interesting to myself because I was in a similar situation. And then the question is, do you feel like you actually needed that push in order to be able to start your business? Because if you have alternatives, sometimes you don't have the pressure, you don't have the motivation to be able to work hard. And when I quit my job, I knew that I needed to be in that position to know that there is no other way available for me, only the plan A. So I kind of had to burn all the bridges in order to be able to that work. Do you feel like it was a similar case for you? Like you needed that kind of stability to collapse in order to be able to be pushed in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean it's a fair question. I do agree with it in a lot of senses because I mean it was such an easy status quo for me to just fall back on having that salary that I could rely on. But even before I got laid off, I had started to spend some of my evenings and weekends. I had started to kind of tinker around with, you know, what could I potentially do maybe as a side hustle? And I will admit, I don't know if I was like 100% serious about it because, yeah, I didn't have like that true push at the time, but then, a few months later, that decision was made for me when I got laid off. But it was interesting now in hindsight that I was already a bit in that mindset. The wheels had already started to turn. And then, yeah, that push really ignited things for me personally. So I do think that helped in certain senses that I had already started to think a little bit on that vein of things of what else could I be doing.
It's almost like universe saw your struggle and so like, come, you might need a bit of a motivation to push this forward to make it work. It's like, "I- I'll throw that out for you."
I mean, it's certainly possible. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it does come back to like when I think about my corporate life, I'm thankful for it in so many senses. But at the same time, I realized that I just was not happy or fulfilled in the work that I was doing. And so I do think that, getting laid off pushed me to really think about what do I enjoy? Who do I want to be working with and spending my waking hours working together with? I mean, that honestly is so big, rather than getting assigned coworkers that you may or may not like or have anything in common with, you can choose who you decide to work with. And I think that has been such a huge learning for me this year. And I love it.
Absolutely. So you needed that struggle and real to get to where you are now. So
Absolutely.
it's interesting how we're finishing exactly on the same point we started. Like college are very useful for yourself. And then something bad happens, don't look at it as something bad. Like, oh, there is also an opportunity here. I need to find that.
Yeah. And I think also too, like I've had some people reach out to me who have been laid off and now they're like, oh, I don't know what I want to do with my career. I see that you've transitioned into being a nomad. And I actually like think that there are some great parallels because, you know, like you have so much more freedom to save money, in terms of like where you live. Because for example, like I was living in extremely expensive cities, New York and San Francisco, when I was working in corporate jobs, and it made it very difficult for me to save money. Versus now, I gave up my apartment. I'm not paying rent at all. And that was such a huge burden on me. And I think that's something that people don't often put two and two together on is you can actually save money if you play it right with being a nomad, or you can travel the world and actually you have more money for your savings, more money to spend on things you want because you're not bogged down by rent, a car, a mortgage, things like that cost so much. So I do think that's an important consideration for anyone who may be listening who was laid off and maybe they're living in an expensive city to be like, man, maybe it could actually work out better to give up my home, to give up my car if I have one, and to travel a bit more because, man, the sky's the limit there.
Yeah, it's very interesting that I've lived in London for a long time, and I spoke to people as well there. Like, hey, and they ask me all the time, like, how do I get to have what's the best thing to do if I want to start a remote business? And I say, like, the best thing you want to do, quit your job and move to Portugal. Because if you have, let's just say, for example, 3 months worth of money to be able to live to survive in London, that's going to hold you for a year in Portugal. And then you're going to have a lot of time to be able to build your online business, which doesn't require you to be anywhere in the first place. So you're going to buy yourself a lot of time by just moving outside of the country, moving somewhere where it's very affordable. You still have access to the internet. You still have access to people, have all the conditions that you need, but just for a lower, like much lower price.
Yeah. I mean, and there are so many places that I think like I've learned about, being now a part of the nomad community that I had never heard about previously. Like places like Tbilisi, Georgia, which is, huge in the nomad community, but people like outside of it really haven't heard of it as a destination. But it's so great in terms of, and I've never been there. I'm just kind of speaking off of the research that I've done and the people I've spoken to who have been there. But the scenery just seems gorgeous. It's very mountainous and very lush, and there's so much great local produce, and it's a great area for being a nomad because they have stable Wi-Fi and great coffee shops and things like that. budget, and it's so low. I mean, you can get an Airbnb easily for 400, 500 euros a month, and it's a nice Airbnb. Like it's in a fancy building situation. So, versus I was paying over $3,000 US to live in New York a month. I mean, just on those two things alone, so night and day different. But yet, there you are in a really cool country experiencing cool culture, cool food for way less money and getting to live your life to the fullest. So, yeah.
I'm very much sold on what to say. Can you say again the name of the location? I want to make a note of it.
Yeah, I mean it's actually a big place on my list. I mean it's just one place of many, but yeah, I mean it's just an example of, because I think a lot of times when people think about nomad destinations, they think of the obvious places like Chiang Mai, Thailand, or Bali, or Lisbon, and those places are awesome. Don't get me wrong. But there's so many other places that are a bit under the radar. And because they're under the radar, they tend to be way more affordable because they're, a bit more up and coming.
So what's the name of the place again? It's something Georgia you mentioned.
Tbilisi? Yeah, and it's Georgia the country, not to be confused with Georgia the state in the US. So
Oh yeah, okay.
yeah.
Tbilisi, Georgia.
Yeah. Yeah. I've just heard incredible things about it. It's definitely like when you visit Nomad forums on places to visit, it's a common one that comes up. So
Sounds pretty good. So,
yeah.
Jenny, thank you so much for your time. I had a really, really good time talking to you, and I think I've learned quite a few things from you. So, thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. It's been great.